All right, so we've talked about GDP, which is how we determine whether or not there's growth in the economy. We've talked about unemployment, how the government calculates it, and that's how we deal with full employment. Right? So the last piece of our macroeconomic goals, stable prices. So we need to know, how do we measure prices? Well, we do it using inflation. That's our measurer, or our way of determining how unstable our prices are. So if someone said, define inflation, how would you do it?
Prices are too high.
Yeah, usually you get up on your high horse and you start bitching, right?
Yeah.
All right, so the definition of inflation, though, is the rise, not rice, but rise. If rice were involved, it would be scary. The rise in general average prices of consumer goods and services over a time period. All right, and again, this time period, usually inflation is based off of a year, but again, since the economy has become so data dependent, inflation can be calculated pretty much week to week. Right, so
And
it's...
they call like 30 people and ask them what prices are too high.
It's not quite as scarily calculated as the unemployment rate is, but it still has its moments, as it turns out. All right. So my question to you right off the bat is that if there is inflation, is the price of everything going up?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Why not?
Because inflation is a general average. That doesn't mean everything is going up. That's just overall.
Right. That means that some things may actually be falling in price. So think about it. Say the last 15 years. Let's go back 15 years. I think all of you are old enough to go back that far ago, right? Darn kids. So over the last 15 years, basically we've had inflation the entire time, right? So the prices of everything have been going up. Can you think of anything whose prices have been going down? Besides the housing market, let's go up to 2008.
They went down in a hurry.
Nothing you guys buy has gone down in price in the last 15 years.
Not steadily.
Not steadily, really.
Technologies? Yeah.
How much did you pay for your first cell phone that was not smart?
Or a flat screen TV.
Flat screen TVs, right? Think about a 35 or a 52-inch flat screen TV 15 years ago. Do you know how much
I
you
don't
paid
think
for
they
that?
had a 52. They might have had a 40.
Yeah, true. There was potentially not even one. But ones that did exist, so 40, 42, those cost $3,000 15 years ago. You got a 40-inch flat screen TV nowadays? Yeah, I mean, you can get it for $300, man. And that's not even if you shop. That's if you just walk into any old store.
That's not on eBay either.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it. Whatever.
And again, we only buy it new, right? Because we don't buy anything used.
Well, they sell new stuff on eBay.
That's true. All right. So just note that some things can go down in price, even though you are having a rise in inflation. What's the opposite of inflation?
Is it deflation?
Deflation, right? Deflation is the opposite of inflation. So instead of it being the rise in general average prices, it's the fall in general average prices.
Stock prices went down too.
All right, so now there's another term that's been coined frequently in the last few years, and that's disinflation. Disinflation, the reason that we've been talking about this one relatively is that lately is because it's something that we've experienced here. This is where inflation falls but stays positive, but does not fall to deflation.
I'm falling off. To
essentially.
be counted as
So-
inflation.
There has been disinflation over the last 5 years, right? From in 2008, 2009, the inflation rate was hovering around 4 to 5%. No, probably not even that high, probably more like 3.5%. We have had a steady disinflation over the last 5 years, where the inflation rate has fallen to basically 0.1%, 0.2%. There's still inflation, but it is not as high as it was before. That's coined as disinflation. All right. So just make sure you know the terms. All right. So how do we measure it? What's your guess?
You measure it with, you said you measure inflation with nominal GDP.
Well, that counts everything. Technically, inflation is only worrying about consumer prices. All right. So GDP is broader than that to some degree, but you're on the right track. I mean, what did we use? We used that GDP chain index. Which one of those works for consumers? Consumer price index, right? So we measure inflation
You wanna read
using consumer
that?
price index. And that is the last time I will write this phrase, because what does everybody call it?
Inflation.
They call it CPI. So this is the term or the measurement that we use to actually determine what the inflation rate is. It's based off of these numbers, CPI, which are very similar to the GDP chain index. This is just the consumer price index. Same thing, except it's only worrying about consumer goods instead of all possible goods that may be made in the economy. Okay? So it's only the things that you and I buy within some reason, right? Because some things that are in the consumer price index would be like 50-foot yachts. How many of you in your lifetime have bought a 50-foot yacht?
I've seen one.
We would like to have. Those were in my dreams, but anyway, that's close enough. So realize that it is any consumers who are both very, very, very rich, and those who are also very, 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 very poor. All right? Now, CPI is measured using a market basket of goods. Sorry, pull up some parentheses. So the way the government actually calculates CPI is what they do is they go out and they figure out what is the value of a market basket of goods. All right? And then each month or each quarter or each year, they compare the value of this year's market basket of goods or this quarter's market basket of goods to whatever the value was for the one that we just used. Now the question is, how does the government know what a market basket of goods is?
Everything that the person might
Yeah.
purchase.
Basically, a market basket of goods is a pile of the average consumption of a person in the United States, right? This is the goods of an average person
So they're not probably throwing in.
buys in a
yacht.
year. A yacht is in there, but not a full one. So on average, how many people buy a yacht per year, do you think? A 50-foot?
One.
Oh no, there's more than one. There's a lot of rich people in this country.
Well, how many is the 1%?
Exactly, 1%.
85 people?
No, there's 315 million people in this country, so 1% of that would be 31 million, folks. It'd be 3 million. That would be 3 million 50-foot yachts purchased in a year. Do you think there's that many people buying a 50-foot yacht?
Probably not.
Probably not. So it's probably not even 1% of a yacht. But there's definitely a percentage of a 50-foot yacht in there, right? So maybe, how about 0.001% of a 50-foot yacht? That is in a market basket of goods, right? Not a full one, because obviously some of us aren't buying it.
So they chop it up.
Yeah, basically they chop it up. But it's a value in the basket. What else do we buy every day?
They're not gonna be
Food.
counting, just like GDP, they're not gonna be counting used goods or
Nope.
stuff like that.
Well, I mean, in this stuff, they actually are counting in used goods, right? I mean, used goods are calculated in CPI. Right? I mean, it's just that the calculation is based on how many of them do you buy on average, right? So how many new cars do we buy on average per year? How many 2-year-old cars do we buy on average per year? How many 3-year-old cars do we buy on average per year? Again, it's a percentage, right? Some of us will buy it. A 10-year-old car purchased this year versus a 10-year-old car purchased last year, what was the price difference? That definitely is affecting CPI. So CPI does not care about GDP. All it cares about is what you spend your money on. So used goods, definitely in there, right? In fact, they're
Not
almost
as
a
bad
bigger.
as marijuana.
Oh no, it's in there.
No, they figure that too.
Oh yeah, come on, now it's legal. We can measure it in
Oh, I know,
Colorado and
yeah.
Washington. Come on. It's now a market basket of goods.
Maybe a prostitute.
Well, you can get that outside the outskirts of Las Vegas and Nevada, right?
So that's in there too.
Well, that's the oldest profession in the book, folks. Now, again, though, this is apples, and it's apples that the average person buys in a year. So how many apples do you think the average person buys in a year?
Bushels.
Yeah, so let's say like 24 and a half, right? So they'll figure out how much does 24 and a half apples cost here, right? Again, a lot of CPI is actually calculated regionally as well. And then what they do is in each region, they average that all over throughout the entire region and say that this is what the overall CPI is for the entire country. Yeah, this is a ton of number crunching, folks. This is a great
Why can't they just say it?
Agency
There's a
work
bunch
for
of poor people and there's only a few rich people.
No way, man. We gotta. So again, this keeps going and going and going, right? There's every person's purchasing of goods, right? Anything that you can buy. So shoes, shirts, glasses, whiteboard markers, erasers, desks, chairs, textbooks, all that stuff is in a market basket of goods. And again, it's how much the average person buys. So they count up how many textbooks were bought last year, divide by 15 million.
Now, are they using like this just for individuals? I mean, they're not saying what a business might
They do it within
buy?
regions. They do it within, this is individuals, this is consumers. Businesses are not necessarily consumers. Right?
Even
'Cause
though they do buy things.
oh yeah, they buy
like-
consumer goods.
Like the school, I mean,
Yeah.
they're buying these things.
I mean, all they're really doing is saying, what's the market, what's the standard basket of goods that people buy? So they're not, businesses are buying some of these things, but the market basket is driven off of consumers, us, not businesses. Okay? And this is just defining what's in the basket when they go to calculate the number. All right? So, what they do, once they figure out the average amount of every item that's for sale that a person buys, they will go into a store and buy them. And what they'll do is add up all the prices for those particular goods. All right? That's how they do it. Right? So, add up the amount it costs to buy your market basket.
So they use taxpayers' money to do that?
Well, of course. It's a government agency. They use taxpayer dollars to teach you.
Yeah.
So, why wouldn't they do it to calculate CPI? Because you want to know, right? You want to know how much is inflation then, so you can plan. These are important things. All right, so now when we do this, what we do is we add up all of these market basket of goods, and we'll say, okay, market basket in say 2013. Let's suppose it was say $25,252. That's nowhere near the right number, folks. This is me pulling number right out of there. Okay, so just grab the number. Right? Now, the way we calculate CPI is we say, take this market basket value and normalize it, or divide it by some year that we consider to be the base year. So CPI in 2013 will equal our market basket in 2013 divided by our market basket in what's called the base year. And the base year, technically it's whatever year you pick. As long as you're consistent from every year to every year, it's fine. Right? Right now the market basket is considered to be 2010. They usually change it every decade, but it doesn't matter. You can pick any year to be your market basket, it doesn't matter. And again, remember that CPI is 8%, so what am I going to do at the end?
Multiply by 100.
Yeah, don't forget to multiply by 100. So let's assume that our base year is 2010, which in most CPI calculators it is right now. Again, it depends on what website you go to. Some of them will use base years 1985 still, actually. Don't ask me why necessarily. And a market basket of goods in 2010 was, say, $24,912. Just for kicks and giggles. Again, number pulled out of ass. I have no idea if that's a valid number. Alright, so, given this, tell me what CPI was in 2013. Round it to the nearest, say, 10th. Wouldn't be a bad idea from here on out to have a calculator somewhere relatively handy, just to be safe. Again,
101.4.
so CPI in 2013 is going to be this number, 25,252, divided by that number, 24,912 times 100. What did you say that was again, Matt?
101.4.
101.4. Lot. I mean, that's all there is to it. It's just a straight multiply, divide, and then multiply. You're done. All right?
What does it mean?
What does it mean?
101.4. Oh boy.
Yeah,
What does
exactly.
that mean?
Would that mean that inflation is 1.4%?
Inflation between 2010 and 2013 is 1.4%. That does mean exactly that. But now, what I want to point out is one other thing before we move on. Let's suppose that market basket in 2005 was equal to, say, 23,518. So tell me what was CPI in 2005?
When you do that, you gotta have a base.
Basis stayed the same. It's still 2010. If you're going to use a base year, it has to be the same base year for every year.
In 2005, 2010 hadn't even gotten here yet.
So it doesn't matter. You can convert $2005 into $2010. No
Oh, so
problem.
we're just looking back
Would it
at.
be 94,
Oh, okay.
Exactly. How'd you get it?
just the same way you got the other one?
Yeah. CPI in 2005. You do it the same way. Take it, the market basket in the year that you're talking about, 23,518. Divide by whatever your base year. It doesn't matter whether the base year is in the past or in the future. It doesn't matter. We could base all of our we could make our base year be 1922 if we want to.
How about 30 AD?
Yeah, if you want. If we had numbers for it, yes, we could. Right? I mean, the problem, of course, is you have to have numbers. We only have numbers for market basket of goods back to like 1922 or 21, somewhere in the 20s, right? The Roaring 20s is where the government funded this.
So
Agency.
before the Depression.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
actually was going on before the Depression.
Wow.
So again, divide by, what was it, 24, 9, 1, 2, and what did you say the number was, Nicole?
94.
4?
Yep.
This number is more than 100. Therefore,
Inflation.
there is inflation between 2010 and 2013. This number,
Deflation.
yeah, deflation between 2010 and 2005, going backwards instead of forwards, right? Basically, prices were lower back in 2005 than they were in 2010.
Why
So-
do they need to, I mean, can't they just,
The fact remains is that you just have to be consistent. If you are going to use your base year to be 2010, you have to for any year that you're calculating.
and that's fine, but what I'm saying is, you look at the actual CPI number there, and you look at what it is 2005, what it is 2010, you can see things costed less. So,
It's just putting a number on it, because we need a number, and you're going to see why.
All right.
Now, one more time. What is CPI in 2010? And you don't need your calculator for this one, folks.
24,940.
for 90, or 90.
No, it would be.
It would be 100%.
100.
Because you have.
Because what are you going to do? You're going to take the market basket in 2010 and divide by the market basket in 2010. What's a number divided by itself? 1. Don't forget to multiply it by 100. CPI in the base year is always 100. Okay? Always. By definition. Basically what you're doing is saying, in the base year, assume that there is no inflation. That's what the base year is meant to be. Alright? Alright, so, now, this is calculating CPI, but you guys want to know, well, normally when you report about the inflation rate, we give it as a percent, right? So, the inflation rate, and this is where some of you guys are going to cheer readily. The inflation rate is just the percentage change in CPI. That's all it is. So if you can remember back to your Math of Business apps or college math or any other math class that you've ever taken how to calculate a percentage change, this is going to be a review. If you haven't done any of those yet, well, here we go, quick review. So, inflation in 2010. If we wanted to know what inflation in 2010 was, we are going to take CPI in 2010. We are going to subtract the CPI in the year prior. What's the year before 2010?
2009.
I do expect you to be able to subtract one. You are going to divide by whatever the CPI was in 2009, and then this is a percentage, so what am I going to do at the end?
Multiply by 100.
So inflation is a percentage change in CPI from period to period, right? So if you wanted to know what inflation was in the month of July, you would calculate CPI in July and then figure out what was the percent change compared to June. So it's always just from one period to the next, based on how you're defining your inflation rate, right? If you're defining an inflation rate as a quarter, then you take this quarter CPI, subtract last quarter CPI, divide by last quarter CPI, multiply by 100, right? Usually, you stick to years. I mean, that, again, it's only in the last 5 or 10 years that we've gotten so crazy about calculating numbers on a monthly, weekly, quarterly basis. So it gets a little bit hairier, all right? But the nice part about it is it's just a regular old percentage change in CPI. Now, so market baskets of goods, the goods that an average person has bought. Normally when you calculate inflation, you really want to say, well, what was the price of a 40-inch flat screen TV last year to a 40-inch flat screen TV this year, right? You want to know how much did a flat screen TV change in price. This CPI stuff, is it doing that?
No.
No, not exactly. I mean, it's kind of doing it, but in the market basket in 2010, did you have the same number of 40-inch flat screen TVs as you did in, say, 2013? No. No. This is where inflation gets a little bit fuzzy, because we're not actually calculating the inflation of each individual item and then averaging them out. We're saying put all of the items together and then compare the sum of them. And a lot of times we're not comparing apples to apples, right? So think about what was in the market basket of goods in the year 2000. VHS tapes were very popular back in the year 2000. Guess how many VHS tapes have been purchased in the year 2013? Almost zero.
They're not making anymore, are they?
Yeah, now they quit making them in 2009. I mean, literally, the new ones are not being made. All they're doing is selling used ones at this stage. But we're saying that those somehow compare. So just realize that inflation doesn't actually compare item to item. It compares basket to basket. That's all it is. All right? Again, it's the way we've been doing it for the last 20 some odd years, so
Just roll with it.
roll with it, exactly. But realize that that's what it's doing, and that you should take it into account a little bit when it comes to dealing with things. Now, fun thing to do with this. So, let's suppose that CPI in 2013 was 107. Whatever. And let's suppose that CPI in 2012 was 104. Again, these are just completely made up numbers. I'm just making them up. All right? So first off, tell me what the inflation rate is in 2013.
7%.
Be careful. Be careful. Use the formula. So if I want inflation in 2013, find CPI in that year, 107. Subtract CPI in the year before it,
104,
104. And what am I dividing by?
107,
Good.
or 104.
104, be careful with it, right?
2.88.
2.88888. So let's say 2.9% was the inflation rate. Okay, so be careful with the inflation rate, just remember what the formulas are, all right? Now, let's suppose that my salary in 2013 was $72,000. Reasonable, right? And let's say that my salary in 2012 was $71,000. I got a pay raise, right? Did I really?
No, we need another one.
How do you know?
You're still not keeping up with inflation.
Is it keeping up with inflation? Can we tell? How do you tell? All right.
The same formula.
Do the same formula,
Yeah, so it was
apply your salary.
1.4%.
This is what's known as your nominal salary. Guess how I'm going to calculate my real salary?
Nominal for 2013 minus nominal for 2012.
It's even easier than that. The real salary is just your nominal salary divided by CPI in that year times 100. So the same way that you calculated real GDP, right? Remember we took the nominal GDP and divided by our GDP chain index. Here we're just going to divide by our consumer price index because I am a consumer, not a world consumer like GDP is. All right? But this formula, same as before. All right?
So what's your nominal
These are my nominal salaries,
But
these
do you add
numbers.
them together or what?
Well, figure out what my real salary was in
Oh, okay, so
2013.
you do
You can do them each, you can do them each individually. What was my real in 2013? Round it to the nearest dollar, let's keep it easy. Right? So take 72,000, divide by CPI in that year, 107, and then multiply by 100.
$67,289.
Okay, that was my real salary in 2013. Calculate my real salary in 2012. Again, use your nominal salary in 2012, 71,000, divide by 2012's CPI.
68,269.
269. Really?
Wow.
Did I get a pay raise?
No.
What did I really get?
Pay cut.
I got a big cut. I got a $1,000 pay raise, but what happened to prices?
Prices went up more than.
Prices went up basically $1,000 more than my salary. Prices went up $2,000. My salary only went up $1,000. That $1,000 pay increase, I basically got bitch slapped. That's the difference between a raise and a real raise, right? So my raise was probably something like a 1% raise, and prices went up 2.9% raise. That obviously 2.9 is higher than 1. I didn't get a raise, I got a pay cut, okay? So realize that every time you guys get a pay raise, you need to compare that to inflation. And if it's the percentage increase matches inflation, then you got a real pay raise. If it doesn't, then, well, I mean, you got a raise, but
You have to cut your spending.
that's right. You're still going to have to cut back because prices, unfortunately, kept up with things. Now, again, realize that that's not necessarily the case, right? Because remember that inflation is the average basket of goods, and if you are the type of person who only buys goods that happen to have prices falling, you know, you may not, you know, this may not actually affect you. But again, that's real, okay? All right, so inflation's a bit of a, you know. So what I like to say is that when inflation rises, salaries fall. And it's simply because if you've been told in your particular job that you will never get a pay raise ever again, more than inflation, which is what the governor said to me, if the best I can ever do is get a raise that's equal to inflation, what's going to happen to my buying power for the rest of my life?
Oh, I haven't.
At the very best, it's going to stay the same.
At the best, I'm going to stay the same. That's the best I can hope for. And that's only if the governor feels it.
I love Governor Scott.
Oh, yeah, he's my buddy, man. He and I, we go out, we hang out.
Yeah. Like to go drink beer at the lake with.
All right, so, inflation also hits interest rates. In other words, if you were to put your money in a bank right now, today, say you put $1,000 in the bank, and suppose you earned an average interest, which right now is about 1%, right? You earned 1% on your money. At the end of the year, how much money would you have?
We'd have $100 extra.
Well, it would be either 10%, 1%. You'd only earn
$10
$10 extra. It's even worse than that. Interest really sucks right now. Now, if inflation were 2.9%, which is what is projected for this year, right? They're expecting inflation to start getting back over 2%. If interest rates stay at 1%, so on $1,000,
You're only making $10.
You're only making $10. How much did prices go up in that year of $1,000 worth of goods?
$29.
$29, right? Yoink!
So what happened? You lost $19.
That's absolutely right. So there is a real inflation rate or interest rate as well. Sorry. Real interest rate is the nominal interest rate. And the cool thing about it is that this is really, really tough math.
I'm going to ask you a question, Marshall.
Yeah?
So, is that why they said, you know, when 2008, 2009, everything happened, you know, the housing bubble, all that stuff, they said, okay, well, people that, you know, homeowners shouldn't complain so much because people that had money in the stock markets and all, they actually lost more than people in the housing.
On average, yes.
Is what they're saying.
Yeah,
So-
stock prices went down 55%, housing
Did it have
prices went down
something to do
40%.
with this inflation thing, this formula deal, or is it
No.
real?
Oh no, it was just, that was straight up real. Because it happened literally from one day to the next.
Yeah.
When the stock market fell that 1,600 points, that was a 45% or a 55% hit on everyone's net worth.
I mean,
the
it was
home
almost
values-
as bad as the 30s crash. Huh?
Yeah, it was very
Almost.
similar. Yeah, almost as big. It was very close.
Yeah.
And what did we notice, right? If you look in history, there were 2 times in our country's history where we've had deflation, where prices actually fell on average. Guess when those 2 times were?
Depression and the recession.
The Depression, the Great Depression in the late 30s, and the Great Recession, right, in the 2009 period. We had 2 quarters in a row of prices actually falling. And in an average year, I mean, the next 2 quarters prices didn't go up enough to make up for the first 2 quarters falling. We actually had deflation. That scares economists almost as much as really high inflation does. Right? Why does dropping prices scare an economist?
It's going
That-
to cause a
That's
decrease in
Cycle
GDP.
thing.
Yeah, well, it's the whole cycle thing, right?
Yeah.
If businesses have to lower their prices, what are happening to their profits?
Going down.
They're losing money.
They're just going down. If businesses don't have profits, what do?
Not hire less
They
people.
go out of
lay people
business.
off.
You know, lay people off, go out of business. You know, exactly. The whole flushing down the circular flow
That's
muscle.
why so many companies had to fold up.
Okay, exactly. Wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It was a thing.
I mean, it's still happening. I mean, look at JCPenney's, for instance. They're closing like, I don't know,
JCPenney,
300 stores
they
nationwide.
tried a different ploy, right? Remember JCPenney's was the one who tried to not be a price follower. That they were one of those oligopoly people who was stuck in a market that was dominated by Walmart.
Mhm.
What JCPenney tried to do is they said, look, we're going to change our pricing scheme. Instead of following what Walmart does and taking a small profit margin, they said, look, we're going to raise our prices and we're going to change our market structure and say we are not a part of that oligopoly anymore. We're different. We're a different market. And what they did is they switched all of their sales and marketing to online stuff. So they started Twittering, they started Facebooking, they started, Pinteresting, they started, pick your favorite social media that you use. JCP was there.
And shop there.
Yeah, and you come shop here even though our prices are higher. And unfortunately, it didn't work. The rest of the oligopoly people just kind of went, yeah, right, whatever.
Yeah,
And
we're
they flopped.
pretending to try and be
What a shock.
Amazon.
People with higher prices don't.
What does
sell.
Amazon do? I think they use the same kind of market scheme as Walmart.
Yeah, keep
Only
your prices
online.
low, people keep coming back, go for volume as opposed to quote unquote quality or differentiation. All right, now, so interest rates get hit by inflation, our pocketbook gets hit by inflation. So, why does this happen? I mean, what makes prices go up?
Businesses raising their prices.
Businesses raising their prices. But
Consumers
can
spending.
businesses just raise their prices anytime they feel like it?
If they're a monopoly, they can.
True. But even a monopoly can't, right? Because government steps in. Right? So what makes prices go up? Again, remember this is an economics
Consumer
class.
spending.
we're getting there. But why do you go buy stuff? I mean, again, think this is economics.
Making more money.
What are the two things that economists always talk about? Remember the very first 2 chapters that we actually talked about real economics? What were we talking about? Chapter 3 and 4.
Trick question.
Supply and demand.
Supply and demand. Economists, that's our bread and butter, folks. We always, if we ever get to something and we're not sure what to talk about, you always just throw out the word supply and demand. Always. That's an economist's bread and butter. So, given that there is supply and demand going in the economy, or even in a market, how do you get inflation? Or how do prices go up because of supply and demand? So, on the supply side, what makes prices? If supply falls, we can see prices going up. So what has to happen to demand for price to go up?
Demand has to rise.
Demand has to rise. Okay, so those are the 2 ways that we get inflation, right? There are 2 ways. One is the demand side. Not until we get to chapter 14. So this is just going to be the lead into chapter 14. We're not there yet, right? But this, we call it demand pull inflation. It is when prices rise due to consumers buying too many goods. Basically, when we have enough money to spend it, and we spend it, what happened to prices? They go up, right? And this is how economists tend to think that sometimes there is a recovery in the economy, is when prices do start going up. Because what is that an indication of? When prices go up, that's an indication that consumers are spending more money. If consumers are spending more money, that means there's more money getting into the circular flow model. That means the economy is going to start recovering, right? So economists, they actually like inflation, right? If you've listened to any talk about the Fed in the last 2 or 3 years, they've said, we're going to keep interest rates really, really low until we see inflation hit 2%. They want inflation. They want it to be higher. Why? Because it's an indication that you guys feel comfortable enough to spend. Consumer confidence. All right? This is often, the phrase you'll hear for this is, too much money chasing too few goods. So in other words, businesses, they don't have enough inventory sitting around for you to be able to buy the stuff that you want. And so in order for their inventory not to be completely depleted, they push prices up a little bit. And normally when they start seeing that demand show up, and they know that they need more inventory, what are they going to eventually do?
Produce more.
Produce more, and in order to produce more, what do they have to do?
Hire people.
Hire people. And we will eventually start to see the unemployment rate fall. Alright, so first steps into seeing how the flow that we've been talking about actually is driving specific things in our economy, right? The 3 goals. Technically, if we want the economy to recover, we have to accept a certain amount of inflation, unstable prices. Now, that's the demand side.
Nope. You're not in the final 4.
You are absolutely correct. On the supply side, so the supply side of things, it's not quite the same, all right? It's more along, instead of calling it supply push, they call it normally cost push inflation. And this is where suppliers are reducing their supply, and it's usually because the cost of raw materials in some fashion are rising. Is when prices rise due to resource costs rising. And I put resource costs rising. Why did I put resource costs in quotes? What are resources? Right, review of the first half. Lovely. So, to businesses, any of the three of those rising is going to lead them to reducing their supply. And when they reduce their supply, what happens to prices? They go up. All right. The other thing that may come from this one, I put resource costs in quotes because it's not just the three standard resources, land, labor, and capital. There's a third one in, or a fourth one in there.
I don't think greed really counts as a resource.
It's not really a resource, but that's also why businesses sometimes raise their prices, right? I mean, in theory, we want it to be because they're reducing their output because their costs are going up, but if their profits are on the fall, some businesses will say, well, in order to get my profits back to where they were, well, I'll just push prices.
So that'd be like gas, the price of oil come down.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and the scary thing for here is gas, if you think about it, for the economy, that's a resource for just about every company, right? Because every company that's producing an actual, real, physical product, what do they have to do with it?
Ship it somehow.
Ship it. And if gas prices are at $3.60 a gallon, that's expensive, right? This is why, again, why a lot of businesses are starting to move closer to where their demand is, right? And who's the biggest spender in the world, folks? We are. There's a lot of companies that are moving their production here because then it's cheaper to get the goods to us because we'll buy them. Good or bad, we're the ones who spend the
Wasn't
money.
that good for our GDP?
Oh yeah, it's great for us, man. We love it, right? To be honest, in this country, people who are complaining about gas prices, they're communists. We should want higher gas prices, folks. Not because we'll have to pay more at the pump, but because it will force more companies to move closer to us. Because we have all the money. We're the ones who spend it. If they want to have cheap resource costs, if they don't want to have to ship it thousands of miles and only have to ship it tens or hundreds of miles, they got to have a factory somewhere here. The other nice thing about us is that a lot of businesses run on natural gas instead of standard gasoline. And who's the #1 producer of natural gas in the world right now?
That would be us.
That would also be us. Thank you, North Dakota and frac sand mining. Good or bad, but it's what it's created is lower resource costs, right? So if you go down into Louisiana right now, where they do all the processing of natural gas into actual usable energy, there are a big slew of companies that are building production factories down there. Why? Cheap gas. So natural gas, lower prices, that's kind of nice. Gasoline, as in drivable and shipping costs, we're not so sad when those go up because that just makes them all come to us. Not a bad thing. All right, so that is the last piece of inflation. Let me add one little piece, and then we'll call it a chapter 13. I don't know if you guys have heard this phrase before, so I want to make sure you see it once. Have you ever heard the phrase hyperinflation?
Heard of it, but don't know what it means.
All right, hyperinflation. What do you think it means?
Extra massive inflation.
Yeah, super high inflation, right? Basically, it's hyperinflation. Basically, it's Marshall inflation, right? I mean, it dances around. You never know what it's going to do next, right? I mean, that's hyperinflation. Inflation, that is big. Again, how do you define big? Depends on what kind of an economist you talk to. Usually more than 50 to 60% inflation. Once you get up there in more than 50% inflation, 50% inflation basically means that in 2 years your prices double. Right? Once you get to 100%, that means that every year they double. Right? We have never experienced this, folks, in this country, ever. We have never had inflation higher than 18, 19% here. We did get up there in the 18% for a couple of quarters in the 1970s, 1980s. That was during the first OPEC gas crisis. Again, see Jimmy Carter's presidency. Now, there have been a lot of countries, though, that have experienced this. And in fact, if you look at Venezuela right now, Venezuela is experiencing inflation rates that are about 72%. When inflation is 72%, what happens in your economy? So imagine, if you will, that it takes, something that was $1 this month is going to be $1.20 the next month. And it's going to be $1.40 the next month, right? So imagine if you're a worker and you get paid. What are you going to do as soon as you get paid?
Hey.
Back up.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to buy as much as you can. You're going to demand lots of goods really fast. And when the sellers see that you're buying up everything that they have, what do?
Raise the prices quicker.
They're going to jack the prices even faster, right? Countries that are experiencing hyperinflation, it's almost impossible to stop. Because as soon as people get paid, first thing that people do is that they say, I refuse to get paid in anything other than cash. Because if you get paid by a check or direct deposit or anything like that, what do you have to do?
Wait,
More
then you gotta go to a bank and put.
That's right, you gotta wait, you gotta go to a bank and take the money out. And it could be that 6-hour wait at the bank that makes prices jump from $1.20 to $1.30. Now you can't afford rice and beans for next month, right? So literally, in Venezuela, if you're working in Venezuela, you get paid in cash, and it's big, huge piles of it. And what do you do as soon as you get it? You run. You run to whichever store you need to go to buy stuff for that week, 2 weeks, 1 month, however often you get paid, and you dump it all, period. You don't save a penny, because it's not worth it, right? Unless interest rates are 80 to 90%, which, do you think a bank would ever pay you?
Oh God, no.
No. All right. In order to take care of this issue, usually what has to happen is you have to have a foreign entity come in and somehow stabilize your economy. Usually it's the International Monetary Fund. They come in and they buy up all of the money in your system and they hold it for 2 to 3 days. And nobody can buy anything for 2 to 3 days using your currency. It's crazy. It's actually happened twice in history. It happened in Germany and it happened in Argentina, where the IMF came in with literally billions of dollars and bought every dollar of their currency. And then said, you have to wait to get it back for 2 days.
So that must have sucked for those 2 days.
Yeah, for 2 days there was looting usually. But I mean, again, there was also, with the IMF usually comes a relatively strong militia army. And it's the kind of army that shoots first and asks questions later. But anyways, the fact remains is that once everybody got their money back, if they're not freaking out about it, and they don't spend all of it right away, what happens?
Shipped it down.
Everything flattens out. Worked like a charm in Argentina back in 1991. Best economic experiment I've ever seen. It was so cool. I mean, they walked in and literally bought every, I forget what they had. They maybe had pesos back down in Argentina at that time, but they bought every single one of them. And they said, no stores will accept any of that money for 2 days. I mean, you could go in there with, with credit cards or other currency and use it, but that was nothing. Worked. Came back and the currency flattened out. Inflation went down to like about 10% from 150%. I mean, literally prices were doubling in less than a year. It's just scary shit. All right. Okay. So just realize that hyperinflation is exactly what it sounds like. Really bad inflation, and that hopefully, knock on wood, that will never happen here. All right.
Yeah.
All right. So that is chapter 13.
Yeah.
A little homework. Alright, was I going to sign again? 2, 4, 6, and 10. There's some number crunching in there, guys. Play around with your calculators a little bit, so make sure you have a calculator to do the chapter 13 homework, because I want you to play around with CPI and inflation rates and tell me how much your real income is and that kind of stuff. All right? So, be ready for it.
Real income.